As of May 2024, we currently have 12 MiG-21s and 3 J-7s in War Thunder. As always, Gaijin likes to change stuff after I release these videos, and there will be more MiG-21s added in the future, so check the description to see if anything important has changed since this video was released. If this leak list is anything to go by, we should be getting one more MiG-21 in about a month. Nearly all MiG-21s have a few characteristics in common. Their defining feature is their very good nose authority and AOA. They have great instantaneous pull, which helps you quickly get weapons aimed at your target. However, in sustained turns, they bleed their energy very quickly, and standing on your elevator will leave you practically stationary. MiG-21s are great at teaching you the concept of turning gently to avoid bleeding energy, and the concept of just because I can turn hard doesn't mean I necessarily should. Acceleration is usually solid, while top speed usually leaves something to be desired, and they all have relatively low cannon ammo and light payloads. I'll start with the Soviet MiG-21s first and get back to the J-7s later. The oldest one is MiG-21F-13, which is foldered after the MiG-19PT at 9.3 battle rating. It has a unique cockpit with a canopy hinged at the front. Interestingly, the canopy was part of the ejection mechanism, but sadly this isn't modeled in War Thunder yet. It's powered by an R11F300 engine, which gives it decent thrust to weight and acceleration. However, it's limited by its rip speed of 1260 kph, and it's nowhere near as quick nor as fast as the F104A. For armaments, it's very bare bones. You get a single NR30 cannon with just 60 rounds of ammo. 60 shells is still enough for several kills with good aim. You get 2 R3S missiles, which are essentially worse AIM-9Bs. They're bad at just about everything, which is normal for the BR, but you can still get kills with them if you take good launches and you have a cooperative enough enemy. You can also use them as cope flares against IR missiles by firing them at the incoming missile in a head-on, or by firing them into the sun. For avionics, as you might expect, you get basically nothing. It has a near useless radar gun sight, and no RWR or countermeasures of any kind to speak of. The MiG-21F-13 is an extremely unforgiving jet to play if you're not experienced, and it's a good representation of how compression is affecting jets right now. In a down tier, you're a supersonic that fights mostly subsonic Korean War jets, while in an up tier you have to contend with planes that have vastly better airframes and armaments than you. The main reason I don't play the MiG-21F-13 is that the MiG-19PT is the same BR. The MiG-19 has the same missiles, another gun with more trigger time, and is far better at sustained dogfighting. I'm not telling you to avoid the MiG-21F-13, just know what you're getting into if you decide to play it. And as it comes second in a folder, you probably don't need to research it, and should skip it for the SMT anyway if you can. Next up is the MiG-21 PFM, also Soviet at 9.3 battle rating. This was the reward for the December 2020 Star event. It's currently going for about $50 on the market and is not a premium. The PFM is a second generation MiG-21 and has the more recognizable shot cone to make room for the Sapphire 21 radar. From here on out, every Soviet-built MiG-21 shares this exact same radar in the game, despite whatever differences may have existed between radars in real life. The Sapphire 21 is a very simple, old-fashioned pulse radar with weak search and track characteristics and no look-down or chaff rejection. It's primarily used for guiding R3Rs, which the PFM doesn't have, but the radar's main advantage is J-band, meaning many RWRs simply can't detect it in realistic and sim. The PFM has an R11F2S 300 engine, which is about 2% more powerful than the F-13's engine, but the PFM airframe weighs 9% more. Rip speed is increased from 1260 to 1365, although you only have enough engine power for about 1290 at sea level. You get the Gish-23L cannon carried in a gun pod with 200 rounds, which is the gun used by most MiG-21s. It fires about 57 rounds per second, has relatively poor ballistics, and I find the damage to be just okay. This isn't a gun you can spray and pray with. Armament is still 2 R3S missiles for air-to-air, but the PFM can carry the KH-66 ATGM, which is unique to this plane and is its main selling point. It's the only beam-riding anti-tank missile carried by a fixed-wing aircraft in War Thunder. This means you steer the missile around by pointing your nose at where you want it to go. In practice, this means it is quite finicky to use and requires you to fly in a straight line towards your target to guide it in, which leaves you vulnerable to SPAA. And the PFM still has no RWR or countermeasures whatsoever. This leaves the PFM as nothing more than a collector's piece, really. If you want a 9.3 MiG-21 for air, play the MiG-21F, and if you want 9.3 CAS, I think the Su-7BKL is far better. Do not go out and buy the PFM. Moving up to 9.7, we have the MiG-21 SPSK in the German tree. This is a rank 6 premium that was available as a $60 pack until it was removed in May 2023 and was temporarily brought back in June 2023 for 9,270 GE. It might be available again this June, but nobody knows for sure. The SPSK is an export PFM with better equipment. The airframe is exact copy-paste of the Soviet PFM, except the gun pod has 250 rounds instead of 200 for some reason, which might get changed in the future. In exchange for having the worst MiG-21 airframe at 9.7, you get better missiles. You can take 2 R-60s, 2 R-13M1s, or you can take R-3Rs on double launchers for a total of 4. What you choose to run is preference. Personally, I use 1 R-13 and 1 R-60, or very rarely 1 R-60 and 2 R-3Rs. The SPSK can also carry the SPS-141 countermeasure pod. This is primarily an ECM pod in real life, but it also happens to have flare dispensers, which is how Gaijin was able to get this and a couple other MiG-21s some flares. Unfortunately, you have to choose between having a gun or having countermeasures at a battle rating where you really want both, which is the biggest downside of the SPSK. I can't stand playing without a gun and with only 2 missiles, so I take the gun. For avionics, you do get an RWR, although it's the SPO2, which is in contention for the worst RWR in the game, and only covers a wedge directly behind your plane. Personally, if I was grinding Germany, I'd rather pick up the Laser M when it goes on sale, or for a cheaper option, throw a talisman on the Hunter F58 and roll with that if you're up to rank 5 in the tree. So I don't recommend getting the SPSK if it comes up for sale again. The other 9.7 MiG-21 is the MiG-21S R-13-300, which also happens to be a premium. As its name implies, the example we have in-game has the R-13-300 engine, which is about 30% more powerful than the R-11 engines we've seen up to this point. This gives the 21S noticeably better acceleration and just enough power to get close to its 1365 kph rip speed at sea level. In other words, this is the same airframe as the 10.3 MiG-21MF, but at 9.7. To oversimplify the 9.7 MiG-21s, the SPSK is bad airframe with good missiles, and 21S is good airframe with bad missiles. You get 4 hardpoints, and you can either take the R3S or R3R on any of them. Personally, I use 2 and 2. R3Rs have quite poor flight performance, a bad seeker with no chaff rejection, and as previously mentioned, your radar isn't very good. However, you're also at 9.7. Many of your enemies don't have RWRs capable of detecting your radar, and these missiles will never throw a launch warning against any RWR because they aren't CW guided and the Sapphire 21 doesn't have a CW transmitter. Up at higher altitudes, they can put in some work with good launches. The MiG-21S has no flares whatsoever. Playing in 10.3 and 10.7 lobbies without flares can be very rough, requiring excellent awareness and forward thinking to avoid being caught lacking. The 21S has the SPO10 RWR, which is better than the SPO2 but only still has 4 antennas. It doesn't give range info, it doesn't give threat info, it doesn't filter out friendlies, and it doesn't give launch warnings, so good luck. All things considered, the 21S plays like a MiG-21F-13 on steroids. You get more weapons and sensors and a better airframe, but still have 10G missiles and no countermeasures. The MiG-21S can have its moments, but it's hard to recommend, especially to newer players, as it's so unforgiving and fights 10.3 and 10.7 jets regularly. Next up is MiG-21MF at 10.3, and this is where things really start to get good. You can find this plane in the German tree and the Italian tree. Both are completely identical to each other in every single way. The MiG-21MF flight model is the same as the MiG-21S flight model, which is fine for 10.3, but the MF has much better equipment than the 21S. The gun pod is replaced with an internal cannon with 200 rounds, and you gain access to the R60 on all 4 hardpoints. Personally, I run 3 R60s and 1 R3R. And more importantly, these are the first MiG-21s that can carry a gun and flares at the same time. This means the 21MF is fully kitted out and has everything you need: dogfight missiles, a decent cannon, a radar, an RWR, and a solid airframe. It's one of the stronger 10.3s, and it handles up tiers better than all of the MiG-21s before it. If you're grinding Germany or Italy, this should definitely be one of the first planes you get in rank 7, and I highly recommend going for it. It's also very much worth considering putting a talisman on it. And if the MiG-21MF isn't good enough for you, we have the MiG-21 SMT in the Soviet tree. The 21 SMT gets the R-13F-300 engine instead of the R-13-300. The hanger would have you believe there isn't much difference in thrust, but real-world thrust numbers at around 1200 kph are nearly 1000 kilograms higher for the SMT. The SMT airframe is a little heavier and it has this big ugly fuel spine, but it's more than worth it, and going back to the MF, I do notice the reduced thrust. Everything else is pretty much the same between the MF and the SMT. You get the R60s, you get the flare pod, and you get the internal cannon with 200 rounds. In my opinion, the SMT is peak MiG-21. It's at a point where the plane is developed and kitted out enough, but not to the point where the equipment has outgrown the airframe, so tier for tier, it's really damn good. The SMT is my personal favorite MiG-21, and if you're grinding the Soviet tree, it is probably the best plane to talisman since it's in the first row of rank 7. I find the matchmaker to be pretty good right now with lots of 10.3 and 10.7 games, and a squad of 2 or 3 MiG-21 SMT players working together is absolutely lethal. If you told me I could only keep one MiG-21 in the game, this would be the one I would pick. After the SMT is the MiG-21 bis at 11.0. Actually, there's 5 of them. I'll go over the differences in a second. But the main characteristic of the MiG-21 bis is the R25-300 engine. Peak thrust is about 18% more than the SMT's engine, leading to yet another noticeable increase in acceleration and flight performance. The 21 bis is pretty quick and will blow through its rip speed, which is still 1365 kph. For armaments, the 21 bis has its R60s upgraded to R60Ms or R60MKs, and it can carry those in a double launcher on the outer pylons for a total of 6 missiles. You can also use the R13M1s or R3Rs, although by 11.0 the R3R is no longer competitive. Cannon ammo is increased from 200 to 250 rounds. Like I mentioned, there are 5 21 bis airframes in the game. The only meaningful difference in terms of gameplay is their flares. The Soviet and Finnish Tech Tree MiG-21 bis, as well as the German premium MiG-21 bis Laser M, have flare dispensers mounted on the fuselage that fire downwards and outwards. The MiG-21 bis SAUs, which are found in the German and Italian Tech Trees, carry the SPS-141 pod like you've seen on the SPS-K, MF, and SMT. You're probably wondering if this big-ass ECM pod hurts your flight performance, and the answer to that is no. In all my testing, I haven't found it to make any measurable difference whatsoever. One thing that is different is the flare pattern. With the BIS SAU's flare pod, they don't fire outwards quite as much as the rail-mounted flares do, but the difference is subtle. I do prefer the flare situation on the BIS SAU, so if I want to take a 21 BIS out, I'll grab the SAU over the other ones, but it's really not something that's going to matter most of the time. The only other MiG-21 BIS difference that I know of is that the Finnish one cannot carry bombs or S-24 rockets for CAS, not that it was a great CAS plane to begin with. The 21 BIS keeps the same radar and RWR as the 10.3 MiG-21s, and by 11.0 you're fighting things like the F-4S and even F-16s, so the lack of launch warning is really starting to hurt. And in my time playing the 21 BIS recently, I found nearly all of my games to be full up tiers to 12.0. Full up tiers kinda suck in every plane of course, but getting singled out by an F-16 in a MiG-21 is especially not a good time. To make things worse, it might be having its sustained turn rate nerfed in the near future. Overall, you do get better acceleration and all-aspect missiles compared to the 10.3 MiG-21s, but the competition is tough and the 21 BIS has not aged very well. In my opinion, the Laser M is an aggressively mid-premium. Definitely not something I'd recommend, especially at full price, and again, I'd rather take a MiG-21MF Talisman over the Laser M if I was grinding the German tree again. Let's get back to the J-7s. The J-7 is the Chinese-built version of the MiG-21, and in real life there are a ton of J-7 variants that range from reverse-engineered copies all the way to highly modified airframes that are quite different from the MiG-21. We only have 3 J-7s in the game. The first one is the J-7-2, which is directly comparable to the MiG-21F-13. J-7-2 has a Chinese engine which is more powerful, although the airframe is 400 kilograms heavier, so the thrust to weight ends up being negligibly lower than the 21F. J-7-2's rip speed is 1365 instead of 1260, which is very nice. It has PL2s, which are copy-paste R3S, and it uses the Type 30-1, which is copy-paste in R30, except it has 2 of them instead of 1. Overall, not super different, but I do think the J-7-2 is a little better than the 21F, and again, it has the same problem with it being foldered with a MiG-19, which is probably better than both planes in most situations. Next is J-7D, which is the Chinese Rank 7 Premium at 11.0. This is basically a reverse-engineered MiG-21MF. Engine power and flight performance sits somewhere between the MF and SMT, and the airframe is very much on par with the 10.3 MiG-21s. Instead of R60s, the J-7D can choose between PL5Bs, which basically act like better R13M1s, or PL7s, which are copy-paste magic ones. PL7s have a little more agility, PL5s have a little more range, so I take 2 and 2. Instead of the Sapphire 21, the J-7D gets the JL-7A radar, which is I-band instead of J-band and doesn't really have any use anyway because you don't have access to R3Rs. The Type 930-4 is negligibly better than the SPO-10, and you get 72 countermeasures mounted below the engine that fire downwards. So essentially what we have here is a 10.3 airframe with slightly better missiles bumped up to 11.0, and to make things worse, you get to pay $70 for the privilege of using it. The J-7D is absolutely my least favorite MiG-21 in the game personally. It doesn't have the engine power, acceleration, extra missiles, or all-aspect missiles that the 21 BIS has, and it doesn't have any of the cool stuff that the J-7E gets at the same BR. Not saying that the J-7D is completely unusable, but with 11.0 Matchmaker being how it is, this plane is pretty miserable right now in my opinion, and I think it does feel like up-tiering yourself in a 10.3 jet to fight 12.0s. If it was 10.7, which I honestly think it could be, I would probably have a different opinion, but in its current state, I am the #1 J-7D hater. Finally, there's the J-7E at 11.0. The J-7E entered service in the 1990s and has some serious modifications compared to all the other MiG-21s. In fact, it feels like a unique plane to fly. Its engine isn't as powerful as the one on the MiG-21 bis, so acceleration and speed characteristics in a straight line aren't as good, but the J-7E's defining feature is its double delta wing. Unlike every other MiG-21, which bleeds energy like crazy during a turn, the J-7E is the exception and holds onto its speed much better, making it an absolute menace in a dogfight, especially on low fuel. The J-7E can flat out win against nearly everything it faces, and even against 4th gen jets like the F-16s, it puts up a really good fight and takes longer to beat. Basically what I'm saying is the J-7E might be based on the MiG-21, but it feels like a unique airframe. J-7E goes back to having a single 30mm cannon with 60 rounds like the MiG-21F-13 does, and for air-to-air missiles it carries 4 PL-5Bs. These days the PL-5 isn't as impressive as it used to be, but it is still one of the better rear aspect missiles in the game. J-7E has a small radar rangefinder which can be used to slave missiles before firing. It also has a fully digital E through J band RWR like the ones you find on Western top tier jets, and its countermeasure is single drop, giving you twice as many flare pops. When you combine the outstanding flight model, solid weapons, and good RWR, you have the ingredients for an excellent plane. If you're playing the Chinese tree, spading the J-7E is absolutely a no-brainer. It's something you have to do. Like I said, there are a ridiculous number of MiG-21 variants in real life, and I do expect to see more come to the game, but the more noteworthy ones are the modernized versions like MiG-2193 and, like I mentioned at the start of the video, MiG-21 Bison. These can carry more modern missiles like the R-73. Personally, I would love to see something like the J-7G as well. I hope you learned something from this video. If you did, consider leaving a like, it really helps me out. Sorry for the lack of uploads recently, but I've been really busy. Hopefully I can get back to uploading more regularly soon. Let me know what videos you want to see, come hang out on Discord, and thanks for watching.